The mustard seed. The crowd stood along the shore, the sunlight dappling the water as Jesus sat in the small boat, teaching them with a calm authority that captivated their hearts. His words painted pictures, simple yet profound, each one uncovering the mysteries of the kingdom of heaven. Once again, he began to speak, his voice carrying over the gentle waves. "The kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed," he said, and the crowd pictured it instantly, the tiniest of seeds, so small it could rest on the tip of a finger. Many of them had sown such seeds in their own fields, marveling at how something so unassuming could hold such potential. "A man took the seed," Jesus continued, "and sowed it in his field." The image was familiar, yet the crowd leaned in, knowing there was always more to his stories than their surface meanings. They imagined the farmer pressing the seed into the soil, covering it lightly, and trusting the earth to do its work. "This is smaller than all other seeds," Jesus explained, "but when it is full grown, it is larger than the garden plants and becomes a tree." The people envisioned it, the tiny seed bursting to life, growing taller and broader, its branches stretching out toward the sky. What began as nearly invisible now stood strong and mighty, transforming the landscape around it. And then Jesus added, "So that the birds of the air come and nest in its branches." The image was complete, a tree teeming with life, its branches home to sparrows, doves, and other creatures. Its shade provided rest, its strength offered shelter, its presence brought life to all who sought refuge within it. The crowd remained silent, each person turning the parable over in their hearts. For some, it was simply a story, a charming analogy about seeds and trees. But for others, the meaning began to take root, whispering of something deeper. The kingdom of heaven, though it might start small and unnoticed, would grow into something vast and powerful. It would provide a place of belonging, safety, and sustenance, not just for a select few but for all who would come. As the waves lapped gently against the boat, Jesus' words lingered in the air, inviting those with ears to hear to understand. The kingdom of heaven was not to be measured by its beginnings, but by the fullness of its promise, a promise as small as a mustard seed, yet carrying within it the power to change the world. The leaven. The shoreline was still crowded, the soft murmur of waves mingling with the anticipation of those who had gathered. The people remained transfixed by Jesus, whose voice carried across the water as he taught them in parables, every word brimming with mystery and depth. "The kingdom of heaven is like leaven," he began, his tone steady, inviting them into another story. The crowd listened closely, picturing the everyday scene he was about to unfold. "Which a woman took and hid in 3 pecks of flour until it was all leavened." The image was simple yet vivid. The people saw in their minds the woman in her humble kitchen, her hands dusted with flour as she worked. She mixed the leaven into the dough, folding it over again and again. At first, the yeast was invisible, hidden in the vast measure of flour. The dough looked no different than before, a lump resting quietly on the worktable. But time worked its quiet magic. As the leaven did its unseen work, the dough began to rise, expanding, stretching, filling with air and life. Soon, it became something far greater than it had been, a transformation brought about by something so small, so humble, yet so powerful. The crowd lingered on the image. They understood leaven. It was part of their daily lives, familiar and ordinary. And yet Jesus had taken this simple thing and tied it to the profound mystery of the kingdom of heaven. His words suggested that the kingdom might start small, hidden, almost imperceptible. But with time, its presence would grow and spread, transforming everything it touched. Some in the crowd nodded, their faces reflecting a dawning understanding, while others furrowed their brows, grappling with a deeper meaning. The parables, they realized, were not just stories. They carried hidden truths, requiring open hearts and willing minds to uncover their treasures. Jesus, aware of their thoughts, continued teaching in parables, fulfilling what had been spoken by the prophet. I will open my mouth in parables. I will utter things hidden since the foundation of the world. Each story he told was an unveiling, a glimpse into the mysteries of God's kingdom, a kingdom unlike any they had imagined, where the smallest seeds held the promise of mighty trees, and a pinch of leaven could transform an entire measure of flour. The people remained, their attention fixed on him, their hearts stirred by the simplicity and depth of his words. And though not all would understand, the seeds of his teaching were being sown, waiting to take root and grow in those who truly listened. For those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the parables were not just stories. They were invitations to step into the unfolding wonder of the kingdom of heaven. The tares explained. The quiet of the house enveloped Jesus and his disciples as they retreated from the crowds. The gentle glow of the setting sun filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the room. The disciples sat around him, their expressions curious and expectant. Though the parables he had shared with the multitude were profound, the meaning behind them remained elusive. One of them leaned forward, breaking the silence. "Explain to us the parable of the tares of the field," he said, voicing the question that lingered in all their minds. Jesus met their eager gazes, his voice calm and deliberate as he began to reveal the hidden truths. "The one who sows the good seed is the Son of Man," he said, his tone carrying both authority and clarity. The disciples listened intently, picturing the sower, the Son of Man, Jesus himself, scattering seeds with purpose and care. "And the field," Jesus continued, "is the world." The disciples nodded, imagining the vastness of the earth as a place where the seeds of the kingdom were planted. "As for the good seed," he explained, "these are the sons of the kingdom." They envisioned the good seeds growing strong, representing the faithful, those who embrace the message of the kingdom. "But the tares," Jesus said, his voice growing more solemn, "are the sons of the evil one, and the enemy who sowed them is the devil." The image shifted in their minds, an enemy stealthily sowing weeds among the wheat, seeking to disrupt and corrupt what was good. The disciples felt a chill at the thought, the tares growing unnoticed until it was too late to separate them from the wheat without causing harm. Jesus continued, "The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels." The disciples imagined the climactic moment, the time when all would be made clear, and the field, the world, would be set right. "So just as the tares are gathered up and burned with fire," he said, his tone steady, "so shall it be at the end of the age." The disciples sat in silence, the gravity of his words sinking in. Jesus pressed on, painting a vivid picture of the final judgment. "The Son of Man will send forth his angels, and they will gather out of his kingdom all stumbling blocks, and those who commit lawlessness." His voice carried the weight of truth, and the disciples felt the sobering reality of justice. "And they will throw them into the furnace of fire," he said, his tone unyielding. "In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The description was vivid, unmistakable, a warning of the consequences for those who resisted the kingdom, for those who chose lawlessness over righteousness. But then his voice softened, lifting with hope. "Then the righteous will shine forth as the sun in the kingdom of their Father." The disciples' hearts stirred at the image, the faithful shining brightly, reflecting the glory of God, welcomed into the eternal kingdom, where there would be no more sorrow or pain. Jesus leaned back, his gaze sweeping across his disciples. "He who has ears, let him hear," he said, his words carrying both a challenge and an invitation. The disciples sat quietly, their minds turning over the truths he had shared. The parable, once a mystery, now revealed the grand and eternal story of the kingdom, its triumph, its justice, and the promise of its glory. As the evening deepened, the disciples understood that the field they walked in every day, the world, was a place where the seeds of the kingdom were being sown and tended. The harvest would come, and with it, the fulfillment of all they had been called to be and do. It was a vision of both warning and hope, and it burned brightly in their hearts, lighting the path of their journey with Jesus. Hidden treasure. The sun was high in the sky, casting its golden rays over a sprawling field, the gentle sway of the tall grass whispering in the breeze. It was an ordinary day for the man trudging through the land, a farmer perhaps, or a wanderer. His worn sandals kicked at the earth as he made his way across the field, his mind preoccupied with thoughts of the daily grind. It was a life of hard labor, modest means, and modest expectations. But as his foot struck something unusual beneath the soil, he paused. There, in the ground, was something unexpected, a glint, a shimmer, something that didn't belong. Curious, he dropped to his knees and began to dig with his hands, the coarse dirt caking his fingers as he worked quickly. With each handful of soil removed, the outline of something remarkable came into view, a treasure chest, buried deep beneath the surface. His heart raced as he pried it open, and inside was a sight that took his breath away. Glittering jewels, golden coins, treasures beyond anything he had ever imagined. It was more wealth than he had ever dreamed of, enough to change not only his life, but the lives of many generations to come. For a moment, he sat in stunned silence, his hands trembling as he ran them over the lid of the chest. The man looked up at the field around him. The vast stretch of land suddenly transformed in his mind. This was no ordinary plot of earth. This was a treasure field. Rising to his feet, he glanced around, ensuring no one had seen. Carefully, reverently, he covered the treasure again, hiding it exactly as he had found it. His thoughts turned to what must be done next. It wasn't enough to have seen the treasure. He needed to make it his own. Without hesitation, he left the field and returned to the modest home he called his own. He gathered all he had, his tools, his livestock, his furnishings, everything of value, and began the process of selling it. His neighbors thought he had gone mad. "Why are you giving up everything?" they asked. But he only smiled, his eyes bright with joy and purpose. They didn't understand. How could they? What he had found was worth more than every possession he owned. Finally, with the sum of his sales in hand, he returned to the owner of the field. The exchange was made, and the field, his treasure field, was now his. The man's heart swelled with joy, a joy so profound it overwhelmed every sacrifice he had made. The treasure was worth it all. As Jesus finished the parable, those listening on the shore were quiet, the story lingering in their minds. The kingdom of heaven, he was telling them, was like that treasure, a priceless, life-altering discovery. It required everything but gave back infinitely more. The joy of finding it outweighed every sacrifice, every cost. The crowd reflected on the truth hidden in the story. For some, it began to take root, the idea of a treasure so great that nothing else mattered. For others, it was a mystery, something to ponder. But for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, it was an invitation to recognize the immense value of the kingdom of heaven, and to pursue it with the same single-minded passion as the man in the field, a costly pearl. The sun glinted off the bustling marketplace as merchants called out their wares, their voices blending into a symphony of trade and barter. Among the crowd was a particular merchant, a man with a discerning eye and a singular passion, pearls. His life's work was dedicated to seeking the finest treasures the sea could offer, each pearl he collected telling a story of rarity and beauty. Day after day, the merchant combed through markets and ports, searching for the elusive pearl that would surpass them all. He had seen many pearls in his time, some large, some luminous, each with its own allure, but none had yet satisfied the longing deep within him for something truly extraordinary. One day, as he wandered through a quieter corner of the market, he noticed a vendor with a small wooden box displayed on a modest table. The vendor's presence was humble, almost unassuming, but something about the box caught the merchant's attention. He approached, his practiced eye scanning the contents. And then he saw it. Nestled within the folds of soft cloth was a pearl unlike any he had ever encountered. It gleamed with a radiance that seemed to capture the light of the heavens, its perfection undeniable. The merchant's breath caught as he stared at it, his heart racing with a mixture of awe and elation. This was it, the pearl he had been searching for, the treasure that eclipsed all others. "How much for this pearl?" he asked, his voice steady despite the intensity of his desire. The vendor, recognizing the value of his possession, named a price that was staggering, one that would require the merchant to give up everything he owned. The merchant hesitated only for a moment, but the decision was clear. No price was too great for something of such incomparable worth. With unwavering resolve, the merchant left the marketplace and returned to his home. He gathered all that he had, his trade goods, his household belongings, even the pearls he had collected over the years, and sold them. One by one, he parted with every possession, his neighbors looking on with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Why are you giving up everything?" they asked, bewildered. But the merchant simply smiled, his heart overflowing with joy. They couldn't understand, but he knew. This pearl was worth it all. With the wealth from his sales in hand, he returned to the vendor and purchased the pearl, his heart alight with a joy deeper than words could express. As Jesus finished the parable, those listening felt the profound truth settling over them. The kingdom of heaven, he was teaching them, was like that pearl, a treasure so valuable, so extraordinary, that it was worth giving up everything to possess. It wasn't just about riches or possessions. It was about finding something eternal, something that filled the deepest longings of the heart. The crowd stood in quiet contemplation, some feeling the tug of understanding, others challenged by the radical nature of his words. But for those with eyes to see and ears to hear, the parable revealed a glimpse of the kingdom's infinite worth, and the joy that came with laying everything aside to claim it. For the merchant, the sacrifice had been great, but the reward was immeasurable. Such was the nature of the kingdom of heaven, a treasure beyond compare, waiting to be found. A dragnet. The sea shimmered beneath the setting sun, its surface reflecting hues of orange and gold. Fishermen stood on the shore, their nets cast deep into the waters, waiting for their catch. It was a scene of timeless simplicity, one the people who listened to Jesus knew well. He turned to the crowd, gesturing toward the horizon, and began to weave another parable, his voice steady, resonating with the rhythm of the waves. "The kingdom of heaven," he said, "is like a dragnet cast into the sea, gathering fish of every kind." His listeners could easily imagine it, the heavy net sinking below the surface, its edges spreading wide and indiscriminately gathering everything in its path. Jesus continued, "And when it was filled, they drew it up on the beach." In their mind's eyes, they saw the fishermen hauling the bulging net onto the shore, its weight a mix of the expected and the unexpected. "And they sat down," he went on, "and gathered the good fish into containers, but the bad they threw away." The people nodded. They understood this. Every fisherman knew the sorting process, separating what was valuable from what was not, keeping only what was useful and discarding the rest. The imagery was vivid, yet they could sense that there was more to his words than the simple act of fishing. "So it will be at the end of the age," Jesus explained, his tone growing more solemn. "The angels will come forth and take out the wicked from among the righteous, and will throw them into the furnace of fire. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." The crowd fell silent, the weight of his words sinking in. The parable was no longer about nets and fish. It was a glimpse into the ultimate judgment, the time when the kingdom of heaven would separate those who belonged from those who did not. His gaze swept over them, reading their faces, sensing their questions and reflections. Then he turned to his disciples and asked, "Have you understood all these things?" "Yes," they answered, their voices steady, though some still pondered the depth of what they had heard. Jesus nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of his lips as he continued to teach them. "Therefore, every scribe who has become a disciple of the kingdom of heaven is like a head of a household, who brings out of his treasure things new and old." His voice carried a note of encouragement, a challenge for them to become stewards of the mysteries of the kingdom. They were to hold both the teachings of old, the law and the prophets, and the new revelations of the kingdom, sharing them with those in need. As the last of his words hung in the air, the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with streaks of crimson and violet. The crowd began to disperse, but the parable lingered in their hearts. They carried with them the image of the net, the fish, the sorting, and the promise of a kingdom where justice and truth would ultimately prevail. For the disciples, the lesson was clear. The kingdom of heaven was not something distant, but something unfolding, a reality they were called to proclaim. Their role was to carry the treasure of the kingdom, both the familiar truths of their faith and the new understanding they had found in Jesus, into the world, teaching and gathering as they went. And so, as the stars began to pierce the darkening sky, the parables continued to echo, their meaning taking root in those willing to hear and see. The kingdom of heaven, vast and mysterious, had been brought near, and the journey to understand it had only just begun. Jesus revisits Nazareth. After teaching the crowds through parables by the sea, Jesus departed for his hometown, where familiar streets and faces awaited him. The town was a place filled with the echoes of his childhood, the carpenter's shop where he had learned his trade, the synagogue where he had prayed as a boy, and neighbors who had watched him grow. Though he returned with a heart full of the message of the kingdom, he was met not with celebration, but with skepticism and disbelief. Entering the synagogue, Jesus began to teach, his voice filled with wisdom and authority. His words carried a depth that astonished those who listened. The people exchanged whispers, their initial awe quickly turning to doubt. "Where did this man get this wisdom and these miraculous powers?" they murmured, confusion etched on their faces. They struggled to reconcile the man before them with the boy they had known. "Is not this the carpenter's son?" one asked, the incredulity in his voice mirrored by others. "Is not his mother called Mary, and his brothers, James and Joseph and Simon and Judas? And his sisters, are they not all with us? Where then did this man get all these things?" Their familiarity with Jesus became a stumbling block. They could not see past the ordinary, past the carpenter's son, who had once been one of them, to recognize the extraordinary. The truth of his words, the power of his works, were obscured by their unwillingness to believe that someone so familiar could be sent by God. Their doubt and resistance were palpable, and they began to take offense at him. Some crossed their arms, others shook their heads, their hearts hardening against the very one who had come to bring them life. Jesus, seeing their rejection, spoke words tinged with sorrow but also truth. "A prophet is not without honor," he said, "except in his hometown and in his own household." His gaze swept over the room, seeing both the faces of those who dismissed him and the disbelief that weighed heavily in the air. Though his heart longed to heal and transform, their lack of faith created a barrier. He performed only a few miracles there, his power constrained not by its own limits, but by their unwillingness to receive. Their unbelief stood like a wall between them and the blessings he longed to pour out. And so, Jesus left his hometown, carrying the weight of their rejection with him. The streets, once familiar and warm, now felt distant and cold. The people he had known since childhood, those who could have embraced the kingdom, had instead turned their hearts away. For the disciples who accompanied him, it was a sobering lesson, A reminder that the message of the kingdom would not always be met with open hearts or welcoming arms, even among the familiar. But Jesus pressed on, his mission undeterred, carrying the light of the kingdom to those who were ready to believe.